Hello and welcome. My name's Campbell and this is Autodidactic Channel, and of course autodidactic means to be self-educated, and we all need to be self-educated in this world, because if we're not, the only choice we have left is to believe what other people tell us. And as we look into information, it's quite clear that what we are being told is not actually the truth of our story. And so we're going to have a bit of a look at chronology and the problems with it, and this is part 2 of the problems of historical chronology. We're going to talk about Scaligerian chronology and how it has literally changed the timeline that we are given. So let's jump into it. Alright, so this here is Isaac Newton. A bit of a portrait, and of course Isaac was a chronologist as well and looked a lot into chronology, so we'll read a bit about Isaac in this bit. So we'll see how we go with this. Probably about half an hour. The issue of veracity is hardly raised at all in the 20th century, and the ancient chronology solidifies terminally in the very shape of the form given to it by the writings of Eusebius, Hieronymus, Theophilus, Augustine, Hippolytus, Saint Clement of Alexandria, Ussher, Scaliger, and Petavius. So they're the main chronologists that give us the story and the timeline that we now use. To someone in our day and age, and the very thought that historians have followed an erroneous chronology for about 3 centuries seems preposterous, since it contradicts the existing tradition. However, as chronology developed, specialists encountered considerable difficulties in trying to correlate the varied chronological data offered by ancient sources with the consensual Scaliger's version. It was discovered, for instance, that Hieronymus misdates his own timeline by hundreds of years, and the so-called Sassanide tradition separated Alexander the Great from the Sassanides by an interval of 226 years, which was extended to 557 by contemporary historians. In this case, the gap exceeds 300 years. So that is basically just telling us that we had a timeline, and then when Scaliger's version came in, it has skewed all the years, and because it's changed the events, the dates of events, it's done things like put people from history supposedly out of date. It's put them in the wrong time by up to 300 years. And so this is the thing about Scaligerian chronology, is it was rewritten. They didn't actually go off the facts that they already had. They went off, basically they tried to decipher or work out what the actual date of Jesus was, the date of the birth of Christ. They tried to work out what the date of creation was, just through their teachings and religious books. And from that date, they then went forward. And even they couldn't even agree on that. Even the date of creation, there's dates given. I think it spans about 2,000 years. So there's many, there's just, that's a huge problem. Trying to pinpoint a date 5,000 years or so in the past, just from some books, to get an exact day and date is, a little bit of a stretch. The Jews also allocate a mere 52 years to the Persian period of their history, despite the fact that Cyrus II is separated from Alexander the Great by 206 years, according to the Scaligerian chronology. So again, they've only allocated 52 years to the reign of the Persian Empire, but obviously from Alexander to Cyrus II was 206 years, saying that that period had to be at least 206 years. And it's written as 52. So, there's so many issues here. The basic Egyptian chronology has also reached us through the filter of Christian chronologists. The list of kings compiled by Manethon only survived as quotations made by the Christian authors. Some readers might be unaware that the Oriental Church avoided using the birth of Christ as a chronological point of reference, since in Constantinople the debates about the date of his birth have continued well into the 14th century. The veracity of the Scaliger-Petavius chronology was questioned as early as the 14th century. Who criticised Scaliger's chronology and where? Well, D. Arcilla, Robert Baldoff, Jean Hardouin, Edwin Johnson, and Willem Keimeyer. The doubts regarding the correctness of the consensual version are a recent phenomenon. They have The doubts regarding the correctness of the consensual version aren't a recent phenomenon. They have quite a tradition behind them. N.A. Morozov wrote in particular that the Salamanca University professor D. Arcilla had published his works Programma Historia Universalis and Divinae Florae Historica, where he had proved that the entire history of the classical age was medieval in its origin. This is exactly the same point of view that was shared by the Jesuit historian and archaeologist Jean Hardouin, 1646 to 1724, who considered the classical literature to have been written in monasteries during the preceding 16th century. The German private dozen Robert Baldoff wrote his History and its Criticisms in 1902-03, proving that not only ancient history but even that of the Middle Ages is a forgery of the Renaissance epoch and the subsequent centuries, with the use of nothing but philological arguments. You can see the title page of one of John Hardouin's books, The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms. Oh, that's by Isaac Newton. The eminent English scientist Edwin Johnson, the author of several remarkable critical studies of ancient and medieval histories, gave some severe and serious criticisms of Scaligerian chronology. The main conclusion that Edwin Johnson had arrived to over many of his years of chronological research was formulated thusly: we are a lot closer in time to the Greeks and the Romans than what the chronological table tells us. Edwin Johnson called for the revision of the entire edifice of the ancient and medieval chronology. His principal works were published in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Sir Isaac Newton, 1642 to 1727, an English mathematician, mechanician, astronomer, and physicist. The creator of classical mechanics, member of the Royal Society of London since 1672, and its president since 1703, had developed differential and integral calculus. He had discovered light dispersion and chromatic aberrations, researched diffraction and interference, worked on the development of the corpuscular theory of light, made a hypothesis that combined the concept of waves and particles as well as building the reflecting telescope, formulating the principal laws of classical mechanics, and apparently discovering the gravity law, formulating the theory of movement of celestial bodies and the founding principles of celestial mechanics. So there you go. That's Isaac Newton. He came up with all these theories of how things moved in space, celestial bodies, planets and things, mainly planets, because, you know, they can't really talk about gravitational fields in stars because they're so far away, but planets. And, of course, today, this is still hotly debated. You know, 400 or 500 years later, it still doesn't work, and now they're looking for the theory of everything, because clearly what's apparent now is that the laws that govern Earth and the things on Earth and so-called small things seem to be completely different to those that govern big things, and that doesn't work really. Let's put it that way. So, few issues there with the mechanics, but let's see what they say about Sir Isaac. He occupies a special place among the critics of the Scaliger-Petavius version of history. He is the author of a number of profound works on chronology where he relates his conclusions regarding the inveracity of Scaliger's version in some of its principal parts. This research remains rather obscure for the contemporary reader despite having provoked major controversy in the past. The main chronological works of Newton are as follows. Here's one book, The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms Amended. And he also wrote a short chronicle from the first memory of kings in Europe to the conquest of Persia by Alexander the Great. And Newton made a radical version of the ancient chronology based on natural scientific ideas. Some very few events were added extra age. I'm not sure what that means. This is true of the legendary voyages of the Argonauts, which Newton determined to have occurred in the 14th century BC and not in the 10th century BC, as was believed in his time period. However, the dating of this event is rather vague in later chronological studies of other chronologies as well. And this is the problem with chronology. You know, that all these stories, they tend to want to go back, and, you know, they've got these stories and they're like, well, let's find out when that happened. When really, I'm not sure that that's ever possible, really, unless they, you know, find a whole lot more new information and books or something, because, you know, these are just stories, and at this point, you know, so much has been burned and so much history has been destroyed and everything, that really, we really sort of have to start with what we know for sure. Get those dates in place. Obviously now we can work off things like, you know, with computer software, we can use solstices, equinoxes, eclipses, all this kind of stuff to date things as well, which will give us a good timeline. But just trying to work out when, you know, Jason and the Argonauts had their voyage based on, I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe there was an eclipse, who knows. But, you know, these things, you know, this is a weird thing, is all this chronology is based off basically stories, you know, things that have been written down and passed on and written down and passed on. But what do they want us to believe? Is that all these stories, no, they're just myths and legends. But when you look into it, that's actually what the chronology is based on. It's just like Troy, right? They used to say that Troy was a myth and it never existed. It was a mythical city until they found it. So let's keep reading. The new chronology offered by Sir Isaac is a lot shorter than the consensual chronology of Scaliger. Newton moved most of the events dated as preceding the epoch of Alexander the Great forward in time and closer to us. The revision isn't as radical as that contained in the writings of N.A. Morozov, who was of the opinion that Scaligerian version of ancient chronology was only veracious starting in the 9th century AD. Let us mark that Newton did not go further in time than the BC AD mark in his research. So again, he was, you know, he was hunting back, you know, at least 600 if he was in the 1600s and 1700, at least sort of 600-700 years before his time. But of course in Scaligerian, that's 1700 years. You know, why wasn't he going 50 years and then 100 and then 150? Or it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And this is the problem with is this whole chronology. It's written to prove people's points of view and to prove certain people and certain, you know, groups of people and religions and all this kind of stuff, to prove them correct. It's really got nothing to do, you know, with facts. Contemporary historians have this to say about those works of Newton's. They are the fruit of 40 years of labour, diligent research and tremendous erudition. Basically, Sir Isaac Newton has studied all the major literary works of ancient history and all the primary sources, beginning with ancient and oriental mythology. Modern commentators invariably come to the conclusion that Sir Isaac was wrong when they compare his conclusions to the consensual Scaligerian chronology. They say that naturally, without deciphered cuneiform and hieroglyphic writings having no archaeological date, due to the non-existence of archaeology. Naturally, without deciphered cuneiform and hieroglyphic writings having no archaeological date due to the non-existence of archaeology in that age, bound by the presumption of veracity of the biblical chronology and the belief in the reality of what was told in myths. Oh my gosh, this is pretty much what I just said. Newton's errors weren't measured in meters, tens or hundreds of years. He was thousands of years off the mark. And his chronology is far from being true, even when in what concerns the very reality of the events described. W. Winston wrote in his memoirs, Sir Isaac often saw the truth in mathematics, intuitively, without needing proof. But this very Sir Isaac Newton had compiled a chronology. However, this chronology isn't any more convincing than the most ingenious historical novel, as I have finally proved in my refutation thereof. Oh, how weak, how utterly weak even the greatest of the mortals can be in some regards. So he's basically saying, you know, Isaac was a smart guy, but he was just too left-brained for his own good. And he was basically going on what he believed was right rather than facts. And like I said, he may have been, you know, more correct or than Scaliger. But this is the thing, when you're basing things off belief systems, and it even says in here, you know, beliefs in the Bible and myths, you know, it's all to prove people right, isn't it? To prove a belief system right. So what did Isaac suggest exactly? Basically, he had analysed the BC chronology of ancient Egypt and ancient Greece, which actually never existed. The word Greece wasn't used until the 1800s, I believe, early 1800s. Definitely not back in the 1600s. He must have lacked the time for analysis of more recent epochs. Exactly right. Since this tractate only got published in the last years of his life. For instance, the contemporary consensual version of chronology ascribes the first years of reign of Egyptian pharaoh Menes to approximately 3,000 years BC. Newton suggests that this event could be given a date as recent as 946 BC. So basically shifting it 2,000 years. Doesn't really say why though. It says the famous Trojan War is dated roughly to 1225 BC, but Newton claims this event to have occurred in 904 BC. The shift is approximately 330 years, which is interesting. You know, he's moving some things 2000, some 330. So again, this is, this isn't, where are the facts? What's he basing all this on? I mean, this is obviously just, you know, an outline of chronology of what's gone on, but it just sort of shows you that a lot of it's just random, and it's really just, you know, this is the story, you know, he was a smart guy, yeah, he invented, you know, mechanics, spatial mechanics, gravity, all this kind of stuff. So a few questions. So, you know, he's really just introducing another narrative, and looks like that it's all based on trying to prove someone right. Okay, so it goes just, I mean, there's a bit more. I'll leave this link in the description. You can have a look at it. You know, there's quite a bit about Isaac Newton, obviously, because, you know, he's put up as one of these very influential, you know, famous genius types. But it's really just, you know, people just arguing over the dates that he's put in. So we'll go here to Nikolai Alexandrovich Morozov. He wrote the following about N.A. Morozov. Morozov managed to combine his selfless revolutionary devotion to his people with a completely amazing dedication to scientific work. This scholarly enthusiasm and his completely unconditional, passionate love for scientific research should remain an example to be followed by all scientists, young and old. The first researcher of our time who had raised the issue of providing scientific basis for the consensual chronology in its fullness and quite radically was Nikolai Alexandrovich Morozov. Blah blah blah. It says 1854 to 1946 he was an eminent Russian scientist and encyclopedist whose fortune was far from easy. His father Peter was a rich landowner and belonged to the old aristocratic Shepokin family. Oh, who's this? This is Morozov. Oh, look at the eyes on him. He looks like a young Lenin. Gosh, these all look like Bolsheviks. I mean, I guess they're Russians, aren't they? Oh, that's him again, Morozov, when he's a bit older. Look at that Mewe. How cool. He's a hairy man. Still got it there. And they even made a statue for him. So there you go. And a museum. Wow. So this is his book. And it says his great-grandfather was a relation of Peter the Great. His mother was a simple serf peasant, whose P.A. Shepokin married after signing her liberty certificate. The church didn't confirm the marriage, and so the children received the mother's surname. Oh, there you go. At the age of 20, Morozov joined the libertarian Narodnaya Volya movement, and he was sentenced for incarceration in Schleisberg for life in 1881, where he had studied chemistry, physics, astronomy, mathematics, and history all on his own. In 1905, he was let free, having spent 25 years in jail. I guess that was for joining this movement. It doesn't really say. So he went to jail and basically, educated himself for 25 years. After having received his freedom, he had immersed himself in a vast body of scientific and pedagogical work. His memoirs are of the greatest interest. Blah, blah, blah. After the October Revolution, Morozov became director of the Lesgaft Institute for Natural Scientific Studies, where he had done the major part of his famous research in ancient chronology, with the use of natural scientific methods supported by enthusiasts and the staff of the Institute. After he left the director's office, the Institute was completely reformed, possibly with the objective of casting the important historical research and his group into oblivion. So, people didn't like the past being exposed. And of course, he's in Russia in that time where basically everything's happening. Morozov was made an honorable member of the Russian Academy of Sciences, decorated with the Order of Lenin and the Red Banner of Labour. More about the body of his prominent work in chemistry and several other natural sciences. Morozov is described as follows. Elected in 1932, known by his works on a variety of astronomical, meteorological, physical and chemical problems, merited scientist of the Soviet Republic of Russia, honorary member of the Muscovite Society for Natural Studies, lifelong member of the La Société Astronomique of France, lifelong member of the British Astronomical Association. So he was into astronomy. Okay, so Morozov published a book titled The Revelations in Storm and Tempest, where he analysed the dating of the New Testament apocalypse and came to conclusions that contradicted the Scaligian chronology, as everyone does. Then he published a book containing radical revisions of the Scaligian dates and biblical prophecies in 1932. Then he's a few more books. So this guy was the first who started using astronomy and looking at things like eclipses and sky phenomenon. The initial name of his opus had been the history of human culture from the natural scientific point of view. It contains detailed criticisms of the Scaligian chronology. The important fact discovered by Morozov was that consensual Scaligian chronology is based on an unverified concept. Having analysed a great body of material, N.A. Morozov put forth and partially proved the fundamental hypothesis that Scaliger's chronology had been expanded arbitrarily as compared to reality. This hypothesis was based on the repetitions that N.A. Morozov had found, namely the texts that apparently describe the same events but are dated differently. And this is, and considered unrelated in our time. The publication of this work caused vivid discussions in the press, and its repercussions can be found in contemporary literature. There had been a number of rational counter-arguments, but the critical part of Christ remained undisputed in its entirety. Okay, so basically, and this is the thing, all this chronology, it's all very much based on creation and on Christ and on the Bible, which is another thing, right? They love to tell us, oh yeah, no, you all come from monkeys, there was no creation, it's all crap. But when you look into it, our whole timeline is based on those books. So we're getting told one thing and given information of another thing. And again, this is all wrong. It's all off because, the chronology is written to prove certain people and groups correct, as in certain churches and other bits and pieces. So even though Morozov was looking at it more critically and trying to be more, scientific in his methods, he still left, Christ in there and wasn't an atheist, let's say that. He wasn't trying to destroy it. So what we get from all of this is basically there's all these different people that look at Scaligerian chronology and they all find different problems with it, depending on what point of view they come from. Now, some of those points of view may be just opinion, like it seems a lot of Isaac Newton's stuff was. It seems like he wanted to prove a different group of people correct. And this is what history is again, it is. It's history is written by the winners, right? History is a group of lies agreed upon. And so basically it's a competition, right, of who can get the most people to agree to their story. They win. I mean, that's what this all is when you boil it down. And so what I find interesting is we've got all these reports, all these different people, all these very highly educated people questioning chronology, but do we hear about it in the mainstream? Does it hit the education system? Of course not. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the people who want Scaligerian chronology and who were ultimately behind its inception are still the ones calling the shots and printing the books. And that's why no other, no other script, no other version of the story is allowed, because that's what they control, the narrative, the script. And of course, by controlling our past, they control what we believe is possible in the present and future. And as they say, people who don't know their past, who don't know their history, are destined to repeat it. That's why they have stolen our history, so that they can keep us in cycles going round and round and round. And so there you go. There's still a bit left in this, and this is only a short version, of course, and this is just an overview. There's actually 7 books that are written on this. I've got 5 of them. I don't have the last 2, but I have the first 5. What I'll do is I'm actually in the middle of building a website, so I'll get them all up on the website so you can look at them all, go through them. There's a lot. Obviously, they're pretty heavy going. There's a lot of information. But, they're definitely worth a look at. But this, I thought we'd just go over, the general ideas and what they're saying about chronology and why it's just incorrect. And the main reason that we can see is none of it's based on anything real. It's just based on people's perception of when certain events happened. And of course, doing that, trying to start from a point that you have no way of actually proving, puts you in a position where you'll never know if what you've come up with is correct, because you can't prove that the start point is correct. So it's very strange. The questionable veracity of the Roman chronology and history, the hypercritical school of the 19th century. Let us give brief account of the situation with the Roman chronology, which has played a leading role in chronology globally, attributed to ancient times. Fundamental criticisms of the traditional of the tradition commenced as early as the 18th century in the Academy of Scriptures and Fine Arts that was founded in Paris in 1701. 2 decades later hosted extensive discussions about the veracity of the entire Roman tradition. The accumulated materials provided the basis for more in-depth criticism of the 19th century. So this is the 19th century. They're saying even that's wrong. One of the prominent representatives of this important scientific current, latter dubbed hypercriticism, was well-known German historian Theodor Mommsen, who pointed out discrepancies between accounts in such passages as, despite the fact that Tarquin II had already been an adult by the time his father died, and that his reign had started 39 years after that, he got inaugurated as a young lad. Oh, so there you go. So that just proves that that's wrong, right? He had to be, you know, he would have thought 39 years after his father died, so he had to be at least 40 years old, right? But they say he was inaugurated as a young lad. Pythagoras, who arrived in Italy almost an entire generation before the exile of the kings, is supposed to have happened around 509 BC, is nevertheless supposed to have been a friend of Numa Pompilius. Historians are of the opinion that Numa had died around 673 BC, so obviously before Pythagoras lived. The discrepancies here reaches a century at least. The state ambassador who went to the city of Syracuse in the year 262 since the foundation of Rome had conversed with Dionysius the Senior, whose reign started 86 years after that date. So, just there, three little quotes just showing how out of that, you know, how none of this makes any sense. None of it lines up. None of it's actually chronological. There's no timeline order to it. This says, ancient miniature from Giondagorci. The Trojan War and the foundation of the Italian Rome are thus practically simultaneous, although Scaliger's chronology separates the events by 500 years. There you go. What we see here is a deviation of about 8 decades. The Scaligerian chronology of Rome is constructed upon a most flimsy foundation indeed. The time interval between different datings of the foundation of Rome, which is a date of the greatest importance, is as large as 500 years. According to the Hellenicus and Damascus, who are supposed to have lived in the 4th century BC and whose opinion of this matter was later supported by Aristotle, Rome was founded by Aeneas and Ulysses and named after the Trojan woman Roma. Several medieval authors concurred with this as well in Giondagorci's Global Chronicle. And we see a miniature notably named Trojan's founding cities, Venice, Sicambri, Carthage and Rome, which is what this is. So this is them founding 4 different cities. The Trojans, after the Trojan War, and it says that they rebuilt, whatever, Rome. But Scaliger says, puts 500 years between those dates, where it looks like they happen pretty in the same time frame. So, you know, just many more problems with it. So I'll leave this one there as we're getting up around the half-hour mark, and it might be a bit of info to take in. Like I said, I'll leave the link to this in the description so you can have a look at it, a read over it, and it is worth doing. It just gives you a good indication of just that chronology is not, it's not off a little bit, it's just completely made up. It's like I've said a few times, it's just a story that's been written, and, you know, dates, you know, it's like that saying, right? Only the names and dates have been changed to protect the innocent, to protect the guilty is what I say. And that's what they do, they change the names and the dates to protect the guilty, to write a story that makes the story writers look like the good people and look like they should be in control, and look, you know, to keep us in this paradigm is really what it's all about. So as we know, his story is not our story, guys. And the names dates, and facts have definitely been changed to protect the guilty. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed that one. And yeah, I'll probably have a look and just do a part 3 just to sort of finish off this. And as I said, I do have all the first 5 books, first 5 volumes. I believe it's called History Fictional Science. And once I get my website up, I'll get them all up there so you can have a look at those as well. So thanks for spending some time with me. Hope you enjoyed that one. Stay awesome, because you are, and I'll talk to you all on the next upload. Bye for now.